Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Jank Tank, episode number 47. My name is Timothy Zaccanino. I'll be hosting for you today. I've got two wonderful pack one, pick ones. Don't know which one I'm going to choose, but they're both viable options here. We've got Chris Versofsky on the line, as well as Teld to talk about some green stuff. How are we doing today, gentlemen?
Doing all right, man. How about yourself?
I'm okay. It's Father's Day. I'm a father.
Yeah, it is. It
Happy
is.
Father's
What
Day.
is being done for you? What is being taken care of for you?
If anything is being done for me, I don't know what it is. There's a very high chance nothing is being done for me, but I don't actually know right now. So my girlfriend is my girlfriend is on duty, on call for her job. So like she can't really plan too much because she can't actually like leave a certain like mileage from campus. So maybe we're just hanging out or something like that. I don't actually know yet, but
Well, hopefully it'll be a good day. You're getting to start your morning with us, so, it's already a good start.
yeah. This is my Father's Day gift to myself is recording
wow.
about green Magic the Gathering cards and stuff like that. But
The green ones.
yep. Okay, we're talking green stuff today. It's going to be a little more freeform, but the kind of idea behind what we're talking about is how kind of green has been shaped around ramp and, some of the changes that we've made in our green section. This isn't necessarily like an evolution of green like we did with a couple of the other colors recently, but we've made some changes to our green section, based on some problems that we've been having for quite a while now. And we're going to use that as kind of a springboard to talk about, balancing around your ramp package and, what green can do to kind of play a fair game, not super polarized game. There's that P word for us. But before we do all that, I do want to go ahead and remind everybody the best way to support the Jank Diver Gaming podcast and the Jank Diver Gaming community is to join the Discord server and come draft with us, give us your feedback. It's a great place to hang out with like-minded individuals and talk about Cube, Retail Limited, and all things Magic. You can find links to our Discord server wherever you're listening to this podcast. And we host tons of scheduled drafts throughout the week, including our Peasant Cube on Saturday nights, the Mainline Jank Diver Cube on Sunday nights, and F&M style drafts on Fridays where our players vote on whichever cube they want to play. There's been a lot of new cubes introduced into our server recently. It feels like someone's debuting a new cube like every single week or something like that. To the point where people are like now, suggesting meme cubes, and then Fuller is just like creating them for people to play and stuff like that. So
I apologize for that. I kind of opened the floodgate on that one.
yeah, what was up with the lightning bolts? I saw something about lightning bolts yesterday.
Yeah, they were talking about what cube to play, and I suggested the 114 lightning bolt cube, and Fuller took that as a challenge.
Yeah, and he built it. Why 114?
So I forget exactly what it was, but I think it was you needed 7 bolts to kill somebody, and there were 8 players at the table, and then I doubled that, maybe 114. I don't remember, but I had some sort of math for why it was 114.
Okay, well, you're a math teacher, so I'm going to trust that you did the math.
Oh, it's 112. That's right. It was 112 lightning bolts because 7 times 8 times 2, right? You got twice as many lightning bolts as it takes for each person to kill each other.
Okay, was Chalice of the Void in the cube?
Is it even on the client?
Yeah, it might be. Actually, I do think it's in a historic anthology, but I always think those cubes built around one-drop cards, I'm like, just throw a Chalice of the Void in there, see what happens.
That's really, really funny. Yeah, no, he went ahead and built the lightning bolt cube, which was, and then people just started going all over the place with it. Yeah, if you want to show up and come hang out with the Jank Divers, you can come here, at least me, glaze on the Final Fantasy set, because this one's a banger.
Yeah, come hang out and at least talk about the Retail Limited set. People have been, usually for the first 2-ish weeks of a format, people will, live stream their stuff. Have you guys noticed, so I'm up late these days. I don't know if you guys have noticed. Have you noticed the Australians have been, like, just kind of hanging out in the Discord, like, every night? There's, like, a group of 5 or 6 of the Australian players, or at least a lot of, like, Eastern players. They just kind of like hang out and live stream with each other every night, like in the Jank Diver Gaming Discord.
I had not noticed that. That is cool though.
Every now and then I'll pop in and just be like, "Hey, what's up?" And like I think they're like a tight knit group of people who kind of all know each other from other servers and stuff. But yeah, they're just hanging out like every night in the servers. Kind of cool.
Oh, that's cool. Aussie gang. I love an Australian accent. It just sounds like fun, you know?
Some of them might be from New Zealand, and I think they've taken offense to being called Australian. So like, let me correct myself.
Oh
But,
yeah, no, that's not cool. You don't want to call
no.
a Kiwi an Australian. They don't like that.
Apparently, Australia and New Zealand are not literally next door to one another. I learned that recently.
They're an ocean apart, aren't they?
A lot further than I thought. Yeah.
All right. Well, this is all to say we've got some action going on in the Jank Diver Gaming Discord, and there are people streaming Final Fantasy drafts. There are people streaming pro wrestling apparently every now and then. So there's some stuff going on here, and you can find links to that Discord wherever you're listening to this podcast. You can also find us on Twitter at Jank Diver Gaming, where I have less and less of a presence these days because Twitter is garbage. YouTube.com/Jank Diver Gaming, where I think Teld might be working on a peasant related video for Final Fantasy. And then
I'm actually working on it in the background as we record this video.
Oh, okay.
Don't tell anybody though. Don't tell Tim.
You can also find Teld streaming or on YouTube at twitch.tv/Teld Talks or on YouTube at Teld Talks. And come join the community and let us know what you think of Final Fantasy. Some of the other stuff going on here. We're talking green, and I've got to imagine Chris popped this one in here. I know this is a card that gets mentioned quite a bit in relation to green, which is March of the Machine Vorinclex. Just straight up Vorinclex. Chris, is this is a U edition?
We picked it up, the pair of us, yesterday.
Sure. Yep. So Vorinclex is very emblematic of a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So why don't you go ahead and kick off the conversation here? I'll notice you didn't actually put an image of the saga on the back half of the card because
it's because
it just doesn't matter. Just doesn't matter.
I'm gonna pull it up so I can read.
I kind of sometimes forget that these Praetors even have the sagas on the back of them because they're just so over the top. And
is it not 8 mana? Target player loses the game. I thought I don't really need to read the flip side.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's close.
Okay, so this is just straight up Vorinclex. I think it's the only of the mononym Praetors that we've tried that actually worked out. But in any case, it's 3 green for 6/6 with trample and reach. That's a good stat line. When it ETBs, you search your library for up to 2 forest cards, not basics, so they can be triomes, dual lands, whatever. Reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. And then for 6 green, you flip it into a saga, and it does something crazy like mills 10 cards and then reanimates creatures, and then it puts 7/7 +1/+1 counters all over everything, and then makes everything fight everything. It's just insane, right? If it flips and your opponent has a board presence, you basically just lose on the spot.
The only thing that can go wrong when you flip it is, obviously they can blow you out with removal, but if you flip it and you mill yourself out, that's roughly the only way it isn't just win the game, because it does mandatory mill 10 cards or something.
Yeah. So the reason we picked this card out is what we're really going to be discussing today is kind of, I think, the way that I look at it is sort of the difficulties around balancing green ramp. There's sort of this perpetual pull and push between okay, well, do we make the acceleration as quick as we can on turn 1 and try to mitigate the power of the upper tier mana cost of green cards? Do you make those weaker to compensate, or do you want to play the best top end? And if that's maybe a little too good with 1 mana dorks, trim the dorks. It's kind of this perpetual question. But Vorinclex has been a controversial card in our queue because we played it for a while. It's obviously very, very powerful. Green was overperforming, so we cut it. And then other things seem to kind of catch up with green a little bit, so we brought it back, but it's been feeling like a problem again. Anyway, what's sort of emblematic about sort of the problem that we're talking about here is this is just a gigantic body that draws cards, and yes, they are forests, but they are in fact cards, that draws cards when it ETBs, and it draws the mana to get you to the point where you can flip it if it's not dealt with. So it's either going to beat you to death, or if there's some kind of board stall, it's going to flip and win the game. It's just a very, very, very brutal card to have your opponent ramp into on turn 3. So I don't know if you guys have anything else to add about it, but this is just this is a premium. This is the kind of power that they pack into green 5-drops these days.
Yeah, this is one of our classic, we call Mole Slayers, where it's just it's not only is it a card that generates a bunch of value when it enters play, it also, for some reason, just has super good stats. It's a 6/6 trample reach for 5 minutes.
The reach is gnarly.
Yeah. It either kills your opponent or it stabilizes your board super well. Your opponent, like, unless they can kill you relatively quickly, your opponent gets punished for electing to deal with it because you're still up a couple of cards. And yeah, they're forests, but first of all, they're not basic forests, so sometimes this card fixes your mana. But more often than not with this card is that green's ability to cast this card extremely early into the game means that if your opponent doesn't have an answer to a very, very early dork, it kind of invalidates ever being able to interact with the ramp ever again anyways, and you're just forced to deal with the big things, right? Because if you cast this on turn 3 or 4, you get the lands you need to no longer need the dorks, which is one of green's problems, right? Is sometimes you have to keep these sort of sketchy hands because you've got like forest, 2 dorks, and like Vorinclex, right? But and you're just hoping to spike a couple of lands. But then if you manage to do that, Vorinclex smooths out the rest of your draw, and increases the odds that you're going to draw gas, on top of having this powerful flip that gives you a mana sink in case you don't draw gas. So I think it's the best of the green finishers outside of maybe Vivian or Nissa. Like the 2 planeswalkers are both pretty powerful. I think Vorinclex is better than Nissa, but maybe worse than Vivian in the current meta. But I'm not 100% sure on that. It just shows up in like all the winning lists. It shows up so frequently, just because it's so reliable. And for some reason, people don't draft this card with the same sort of fervor that they might a Nissa or some of the other green pieces at top end, despite it being probably in that top tier of green finishers.
And that's Nissa Who Shakes the World, by the way, not Nissa Ascended Animist, which is also potentially an absolutely busted 5-drop. So
yep. I forget that card even exists. It's like so far outside the realm of like we want to play with that card. It's so good.
So
yeah, Robo Nissa is beyond all of us. It's truly perfected and ascended or whatever.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. It's wild too because, you know, first of all, I just want to touch on something that's really funny. Like if I had told you a year ago that you would be saying that like 5 mana Vivian is potentially more powerful than 5 mana Nissa, like you'd think you'd had some kind of stroke and we were checking you out of a hospital, probably. So I think it's funny that we got there. But yeah, I agree with you. I think people look at Vorinclex, they know it's really, really powerful, but because the Planeswalkers do such unique things in the green space, and this is basically just an insane creature, maybe people don't look at it as special as it is. It goes in all the same decks that Nissa goes in, but there are decks that like aren't really fantastic Nissa decks that are still great Vorinclex decks.
Yeah, the Bank Cocaine deck is a deck that I come up with. Like, if I'm playing that deck, like, the only 5-drop that we play that I'm really interested in that deck is Vorinclex, right? Like,
Vorinclex, right, yeah.
And the Agonosaurus, but I'm interested for the cycle, not the actual body of the creature. But, yeah, like, if you're in these more tempo-oriented green decks, I think Vorinclex is the kind of card that's still worth playing up on the curve, whereas most of these other cards don't quite get there in your deck that's trying to be very cheap interaction and efficient threats.
Yeah, I mean, Vorinclex you just like slam in your Jund deck.
Yeah, this card is a little emblematic of an issue we've had with 5-drops in green in general, and for some reason they landed on this era, this 2022 to 2023 era. They landed on 5 mana 6/6 as like the paradigm for like green creatures. You know, we had Elder Gargaroth, right, which very, very similar, like, oh, I need to kill that or I'm gonna die. What was the one from DMU? Defiler of Vigor, is that right?
Yeah, Defiler of Vigor. Although Defiler of Vigor is actually like a 5 mana 8/8, but
because it grows everything.
God, we have so many. This is another card I haven't thought about in a while. We have so many absurd green 5-drop options. It's
they're
truly
either
crazy.
And this has always been our problem, is they're either absurd and like game defining on their own, or they're Cavalier of Thorns, where it just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like a good fit, stuff like that.
Battle Mammoth.
I guess we're in a pretty good spot. I think Balustrade Worm's solid, and we're trying out Titan. Titan could be a bust. Titan could be good. Who knows right now? It's hard to say after a week of drafting with it. But Vorinclex is, emblematic of that pushed 5-drop green creature. I mean, Elder Gargaroth will and Defiler of Vigor will do some absolutely disgusting things that Vorinclex can't do. But the fact of the matter is, if those get answered by Doomblade, which yes, they died to Doomblade, then they don't leave you anything behind. Whereas Vorinclex, at least draws you those 2 lands, which matters quite a bit. So Vorinclex ends up being, better than those in a lot of situations without having the absolutely ridiculous ceiling that those cards have. Like, there are some board states where you can attack through Vorinclex, chump attack into Vorinclex with your go wide aggro deck or something like that and get a meaningful attack in. But you can't do that with like Gargaroth, because the way Gargaroth's block trigger works. And then Defiler, obviously, if Defiler lives, your board just gets out of hand. So Vorinclex, despite being like in a vacuum, kind of like better value if it lives through removal, is kind of like the more fair card for us and the one that we're playing on. It's kind of a come and go card. We cut it at one point because it was too strong, and then whenever green needs a boost, those are the type of cards that we look at to bring back. So we're on Vorinclex right now, but like Chris said, it is a little bit controversial.
Yeah, I think Vorinclex does occupy that kind of sweet spot in a way between like the ridiculous, if you untap with this, you auto win the game of Defiler and Gargaroth, but not quite in that like dirtly battle mammoth tier of like, this is not feeling like it's a good value for your 5 mana. And honestly, I think Vorinclex, if it didn't have the flip, would be a totally reasonable card. But I do think the flip, even though it doesn't come up a lot, the threat of it on your already like must answer threat just means that sometimes you get into game states where you top deck it and your opponent has a 1-turn window to not lose the game. And it puts it in that same exact space as some of those cards like Vorinclex and Defiler that are like, all right, you have the answer right now, because if you don't, you're going to lose the game.
Yeah, I mean, Wizards of the Coast, Magic the Gathering has recognized there was a long period of time where green was like really bad. And they've kind of recognized one of the ways to rectify that is to just make their creatures huge, which, as we've talked so much about stat lines going up over time and stuff like that. But if stat lines are going to go up across the board, then, the color of big creatures needs to kind of correct for that by going up even bigger. And they've just been printing some like absurd stat lines on green creatures.
5-mana, 8/8 tramples. You mean like that?
Yeah, with multiple upsides on top. Like, you would usually get a downside on that card like 5-10 years ago, and now it's just multiple upsides and modality and stuff like that. So that's just where green's at. And I think, you know what, Teld, I think maybe you mentioned it. We were talking about retail limited or something, where you had mentioned like, green keeps getting these big common creature. Like, I think we were talking about Balam T-Rexor maybe, or maybe it was a conversation with someone else.
I think we were talking about that. We were talking about that and the Colossal Behemoth or whatever it is, that are just these like absolutely massive cards.
For retail limited, it's like, man, they just keep printing these massive green creatures. And, my response was like, but wouldn't green suck if those creatures like green almost needs stuff like that to be competitive, and it just so happens that like you die to those cards if they go unanswered, but like green just sucks if it doesn't get big fatty creatures. It's its identity these days. So yeah, Vorinclex, good card as it turns out, but we're going to use that as a transition point to talk about green in general. But I think we have to stem this whole conversation from the perspective of mana dorks, ramp, things like that, right? And I guess a good place to start is to kind of discuss what's going on with our 1-mana dorks and the changes that we recently made and why we made those changes to our 1-mana dork section. Do you guys want to chat about what happened recently or what we recently did in our Final Fantasy update?
Teld said we needed to cut 1-mana dorks, so we did.
Teld speaks, we do.
Putting this all on me, huh? No decision making on your part. I mean, I have been kind of signaling this for a little while that I think, though, the 1-mana dorks are a bit too prevalent. They're a bit too difficult to interact with, especially given that we cut some of the early game interaction, like cut down and cards like that, in order to make our aggro decks a little more viable, because they're really struggling. But in doing that, we also limited some of the responses to early game dorks. And I think like the sentiment in the community has been that the current state of green is that if their opponent plays a turn 1 dork on the play, you basically lose the game, because their turn 2 is going to be so explosive. And I've likened it a couple of times to like, when you draw a green mana dork on turn 1, you essentially are getting to cast Time Walk. And that is obviously Time Walk, super busted card. And when you get to cast that on turn 1, it's pretty messed up. And Chris said something last night. We were kind of working out some show notes, and he said green 1-drops are better at being 1-drops than any other color, and all the other 1-drops kind of suck late, even if the dorks are suck a little more. But like what he means by that is that 1-drops, the whole point of having them in your deck is to get an early advantage when your opponent's still stumbling on mana, right? It's to play to the board early. And the green mana dorks do that so well because there's no advantage really that the other 1-drops can create that is equivalent to generating 50% more mana on turn 2. And when your best players start recognizing that like the green mirrors also are super uninteresting, like when you've got really good players, especially ones who don't complain a lot, talking about how absurd it is to just go 1-drop into 1-drop into like 1-drop 2-drop or whatever, and having like 5 to 6 mana on turn 2 or turn 3, excuse me. You're like, they've created a bit of a problem. I think we're going to talk about some of the reasons for that, but needless to say on that, we've basically decided that we wanted to trim it back. We talked about cutting all the 1-mana dorks, but what we settled on was to just cut it down to the 2 iconic ones of Birds of Paradise and Llanowar Elves. Those have like nostalgia to them. And I think one thing is that like, it also means that green still gets these power cards, right? You still have these really powerful draws. You're just not going to be able to build your entire deck with the intent of having a 1-mana dork. If there's only 2 in the cube, you're probably never getting more than one of them unless green is wide open, because they'll be a top tier pick. And so you're not going to really be able to build your deck around having a 1-mana dork. You're going to have to play to the 2-mana dorks. But like when you draw the 1-mana dork, you'll still get that really nice, do you have the removal spell opponent, or else I'm going to cast something really powerful on turn 2.
So a couple clarifying points to the listener. First off, again, working with the arena pool, it should clarify exactly what the 1-mana dork situation was in the first place. We had Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, Avacyn's Pilgrim, and then Birds of Paradise and Delighted Halfling. And then as an off dork, we had a Utopia Sprawl. Those are like the 1-mana accelerants that are available to us. So we don't have Noble Hierarch or Ignoble Hierarch or any other 1-mana dorks that might be out there that I'm not thinking of, Finhorn Elves or whatever. So 6 kind of 1-mana options that we had. We've been off of Utopia Sprawl for a while because it's just uninteractable. You just can't remove it without some sort of weird disenchant early on. We don't play a lot of like turn 1 disenchants or anything like that. No. So that one was especially egregious. And we did have Delighted Halfling for a while as a way to bolster the green matchup against blue, but that one is out now as well. There's a community, maybe not our community, but there's like a sentiment in Magic as a whole from players that like 1-mana dorks are like endemic to the identity of green. Like
they are.
Yes, it's true. It's not just sentiment. It is true that 1-mana dorks are kind of like traditionally what green ramp is all about. Like to the point where if you cut 1-mana dorks from Vintage Cube, people would clown you. They'd be like, "What are you doing? Like you're ruining green." So like, do you think like we're actually taking a hit to green's identity by doing this? Like, we're doing it because we think it's right for our environment. But do you think like it kind of damages how green is going to play out? Like, do you foresee this being a problem for green in the future, that it just doesn't have access to 1-mana dorks, like kneecapping it?
There's a couple things I want to touch on in quick succession. So, Teld mentioned a minute ago, like, players are realizing that it's crazy to play like a 1-mana dork and then like untap and go 1-drop, 2-drop, or 3-drop. And like, if you don't play our cube and you're listening to this, you might think, well, no shit, that's like what green is. That's literally what 1-mana dorks have always done since the dawn of time. And we're not saying that players are just now realizing that ramp exists. What it really gets down to is 1-mana ramp was already kind of a snowball-y mechanic, but when they keep printing better snowballs that start out as larger snowballs, that becomes progressively more problematic. Right, so what ultimately I think the struggle that you end up having to consider, like as a designer, if you're having this problem or you're perceiving that you're having this problem, is something that I mentioned earlier, which is, are 1-mana dorks so important to the identity of green that you end up having to nerf like everything that you can ramp into to preserve that early ramp? Or do you adjust the ramp curve? And we've kind of tried both ways, honestly. One of the issues I think that some designers have probably run into is, for whatever reason, like top-end green stuff either tends to be like really insane or really mediocre, and there's not like a ton of space in between.
No.
I don't know if you guys have like found that yourselves, but like we've mentioned a couple cards that we don't play anymore, right? Defiler of Vigor, which is a 5 mana 6 drop that allows you to pay 1 Phyrexian mana instead of a green pip when you cast spells, and when you cast green spells, everything you own gets a +1/+1 counter on it. It's insane. There's Robo Nissa, which is like technically a 7 drop, but can be spat out with Phyrexian mana for 5 mana that destroys things and makes enormous tokens. Like when they keep printing this green stuff that's just so absolutely bonkers for its mana value, it becomes progressively more powerful to sort of cheat on those mana values. So it really depends, I guess, in your cube on whether or not you think you have a green problem. But this is kind of, I know I'm like a little all over the place here, but what I'm getting at is like we've noticed this with all the colors, like, and just in Magic cards, the way they're designed in general now is things snowball harder than they used to along different axes depending on which color you're in. This is the way that green has been doing it. And just by virtue of designing your cube the way that you always have, they've printed so many cards now that just take over games that you kind of have to decide where you're going to pull the levers. So once upon a time, like when we first designed this cube back in the day, we only had Llanowar Elves, right? Which means that all of our ramps started on 2. So instead of the most powerful thing you were able to do in green being starting on 1 and spitting out a turn 2 3 drop, it was starting on 2 and then spitting out a turn 3 4 drop. There's a really, really big difference there. Tim, I don't know if you remember this, but green also had a horrible red matchup, which is funny to think of now. But it had a horrible red matchup because a bunch of the 2-mana dorks that we had access to had 2 toughness or less, so they died to shock.
Yeah,
which basically ended the game. God, Incubation Druid, such a bad card.
Yeah.
Such a bad card.
Gilded Goose, baby.
Yeah, oh my god, the goose is loose.
He's like, we only had 1 mana dork. It's like, no, we had Gilded Goose.
We had Gilded Goose. What I think is kind of an interesting question, I don't really have a good answer, right, is I've said before that if I don't have like at least 3 1-mana dorks in my green deck, then I generally try to look at building it in such a way where it's more like a mid-range deck that starts on turn 2. Because 1-mana dorks, just like most 1-drops, are really terrible when you draw them later in the game. So like having 1 or 2 in your deck has never felt like good to me, because there's like some percentage chance that you're going to have like a great draw, but mostly those cards are just air because you're not going to open on 1 most of the time. And the point is to have enough of them to maximize the probability that you will have. You know, it kind of feels like playing an aggro deck with like 2 1-drops in it. Like, why wouldn't I just go a little bit bigger? So the fact that we've left 2, mostly like at my insistence, just because I like having them in the list. But like, I'm wondering, I don't know, Teld, I don't know what your perspective is, but like part of me wonders, like, if you're only going to have like a tiny pinch of them, is it worth it to have them at all? But that we're just going to have to sort of feel that out over time.
Well, I mean, regardless of whether you've got the 1-mana dorks or not, you're still going to be playing 3-drops, and playing a 1-drop into a 3-drop is the biggest reason. Like, we talked about the 5-drops being a big deal, but really the thing that's pushed green so hard is that it turns out playing a turn 2 3-drop is really, really broken. I don't know if you're aware of this, but, you know, cards like Breaches, cards like, I mean, it depends on, like, there's 2 angles to it, right? There's the play cards like Breaches, play cards like, you know, potentially Adeline, though that's a little more difficult. Play cards like Blue Contaminator that put a lot of pressure on the game. And then there's the other side of play cards like Eldrazi Repurposer, play cards like Huatli, you know, that are going to continue to advance your mana situation and improve the consistency at which you're getting to your more powerful draws. But I think the one that's really stuck out is cards like Serac. When you play a turn 2 Serac, I mean, it does feel like the game is kind of just over. And that's partly due to Serac being a kind of messed up card, though I do like kind of what it does for our green section. It's something we didn't really have before, but the card itself is super, super powerful. But being able to play 3-drops on turn 2 is a really big deal. It's just so much. The power curve of Magic is such that every mana you add scales up the power a lot. And we're currently peaking in Magic at like 3-drops now, as opposed to like 4 and 5s. So a lot of the power in Magic is wrapped up in these 3-mana plays, and being able to get those out a turn ahead of schedule just puts your opponent on Doomblade check pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's true. In addition to the fact that like you used to have to go pretty far up the MVs to get like serious juice out of a creature. Like your classic, like really big ramp targets literally don't function without dorks because you're never going to natural cast them, right? like your 7 drops, etc. But when you start printing like 4 and 5 drops that do like what previously was the reserve of like 7 drop powerful things, it makes your dorks even more powerful than when they were like, instead of printing cards where it's necessary to have them to even cast them, you're printing castable cards that dorks just accelerate you into, right? Which is insane. Not to mention the fact that like with 1 mana dorks, you can do like we're talking about the difference between like a 1 mana dork spitting out a 3 drop on 2, or a 2 mana dork, 2 drop dork spitting out a 4 drop on 3. Like obviously casting a 3 drop on turn 2 off a 1 mana dork is more powerful. But the other thing that 1 mana dorks make possible is ramping on turn 1, double ramping on turn 2, and playing a 6 drop on turn 3, right? Like that's when it gets really out of hand too. Is it's not just like you're not just accelerating the game by 1 step, you're creating the possibility of accelerating the game by multiple steps over the course of 2 turns. And I've seen a turn 3 Kogla like kill your 2 drop.
Yeah, that and two, and the 2 mana dorks have the issue of being much more interactable, right? It's much more likely that your opponent is going to have by 2 mana something that they can play to slow you down potentially.
That's true
Whereas
too.
on 1, if you're not playing red, which we could see a shift of red having a favorable matchup again, because we're kind of putting it into the same spot that the cube used to be in, where all of the mana dorks are tied up at 2 mana, and that most of them still die to a shock. So it could be that the kind of dork plan becomes much softer to aggro. But outside of red, which has a lot of 1 mana interaction, most of the other colors don't have as much 1 mana interaction. You know, they're not playing a ton of cards that can really deal with a turn 1 dork. So I think that's something that, you know, it's not for every environment. Obviously, the more powerful environment you deal with, the more powerful threats you have, you can play more of these 1 mana dorks because green ends up needing them to even remotely be competitive. But when you're playing in kind of a curated, more lower, fairer power level environment, like we're pretty cognizant of trying to keep out like true power outliers out of our cube, or at least not letting them, you know, sit for too long after they become miserable to play against. You know, it becomes a lot harder to justify the dorks when they're just ramping out these really, really powerful things on turns 2 and 3. You know, we'll see. I'm sure green is going to get weaker. Like it's just almost a matter of fact that green is going to be in a worse spot without a bunch of 1 mana dorks than with them. The question remains is like, what do the green decks look like moving forward?
I mean, I think they're going to look basically the same. You're just not going to goldfish like a 1 drop as often. I don't think I don't think their construction is going to end up being very different. And I do think that it's going to, I don't want to call it an opportunity because it's more of a restriction, but I think you're probably going to see like an increase in the green decks that are drafted that are basically like their game plan. They were never going to be like a dork deck. Like the idea was you were going to start playing like really solid, like Gruul Spectrum 2s on 2, and then just play a proactive game plan from there, right? Like the kind of decks that want to go like Quirion Beastcaller into Breaches into Questing Beast, right? And you didn't make room for dorks in the first place. We're probably going to see a little bit more of that. But I imagine the green decks are going to look largely the same. They're just going to have fewer explosive starts. Actually, now that I'm thinking about this too, I think maybe slowing green down a little bit. I think the color that's going to benefit from the most from that is probably going to be white. Which is actually that's a good thing given where white is in our metagame, because you were mentioning not every color is really equipped to deal with a turn 1 dork. Black and red have a hell of a lot better ways, like more ways than white does, right? Like white doesn't really have any proactive like single mana cheap removal anymore, I don't think.
You can path your opponent's dork.
Yeah, you could path your opponent's dork.
Legally, no one can stop you.
No one can stop you from doing that. White did have more sort of like cheap removal, and that might be something like in the past because aggro was really suffering. Maybe that's something to look at. But yeah, like red has like shocks and whatnot. Black has like fatal push and bauble and things of that nature. Blue can't deal with turn 1 dorks, but blue is just the best equipped color to deal with green for reasons we've discussed ad nauseum. It's really, especially as a white player on the draw, you're like a white aggressive deck. Your opponent goes like turn 1 dork, you're like, okay, turn 1 Thraben Inspector, and they're like, here's this gigantic thing on 3, and you untap it. Like the game is like over. You know it is.
It's really miserable when you're playing the white deck on the draw, because then your opponent goes turn 2 Eldrazi Repurposer, and you realize that not only can you not trade with their creature because it's bigger than yours, when you do, you're going to get a bunch of mana out of it.
Yeah, it sucks. Yeah. Or yeah, you could untap and be like, wow, that green 3-drop sure is gonna snowball. I guess I better kill it with my 2-mana removal spell that leaves behind some kind of game object for them. And then they untap and they play a 4-drop, and then like you're not coming back, right? You're just not coming back. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, in an environment like Vintage Cube, you know, where combo goldfishing is like a way that people win games, I don't think in those type of cubes, I don't think you should ever cut dorks, like 1-mana dorks, because the dork decks in those kind of higher power environments tend to be kind of quasi combo decks anyway, you know. But for fairer environments, we're just kind of finding that we really are living in the era of the 3-drop. And it's not just in green. Every single set, every color gets like 4 rare 3-drop creatures that are worth talking about. Just have had recently, the last few years, they've had this just ludicrous like love affair with printing like more really good 3-drops than you could possibly play. Right, and every single one that they print, like the better the stock of these 1-mana dorks get. It's just kind of finally reached a critical breaking point. You know, gone are the days when the best thing that you can do is like turn 1 dork, turn 2 tireless tracker. Like tireless tracker, I would say, is in like the bottom third of our green 3-drops at this point.
You're trying to ramp to Woodfall Primus or whatever.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're casting like Nissa Ascended Animus on turn 3, or you know Vorinclex on turn 3. Like that's what you're doing now. And like obviously, it's kind of like those like the old school blue effects that really haven't changed. You know, they're just like they've been getting progressively sort of more powerful like as the context of the game evolves. I mean, green dorks do what dorks have always done. It's just, you know, the things that you can do exploitatively with the dorks is just getting progressively crazier. And I think the dorks being the issue, and, you know, Teld or Tim, like, check me on this if you think that I'm wrong, because I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to Constructed. But the way that I've kind of read them sort of printing these progressively more and more insane, like, green 4 and 5 drops, is because really heavy green decks don't show up a lot in contemporary Constructed, at least not standard, and it kind of feels like they're doing this thing where they're like, oh man, this like 5-mana 8/8 that cycles to make things indestructible, like if this doesn't make green playable and standard, like I don't know what will. I think the fact that like they keep printing all these crazy green creatures and you don't really see green in Constructed, I think that's a function of the fact that like you can't play like in a standard deck, you can't play like 4 Elvish Mystics and 4 Llanowar Elves. You can't program a green deck with enough dorks. Like the dorks are the thing that make these cards like cutting edge for Constructed, is your ability to accelerate into them.
I was gonna say that like for a good while there, WotC, it's funny we talk about like restricting dorks for balance purposes, because there was a very long period of time there where WotC refused to reprint even Llanowar Elves into standard because they didn't want green being able to accelerate on turn 1. And I think you're right, Chris. The last time I think green was remotely playable in standard, there was like a Golgari Rock deck that was using like Llanowar Elves, Caustic Bronco, and like Preacher of the Schism with a bunch of removal and Sheoldred. But that deck was more of like a black rock deck using some good green cards to supplement and like, you know, take advantage of the good fixing and acceleration off of Llanowar Elves, rather than like a green deck. And like kind of looking at the current state of standard, like there's not a green deck that I would consider like an actual green deck at all in the top decks of standard at the moment. There's a few that dabble in green with like the Zur deck that, you know, uses like the Overlords or whatever.
Which it's not a green deck though, right? Like not.
Yeah, I would not consider that a green deck.
Well, and I played Golgari mid-range in Ixalan standard, right? And that very much was a green deck, but that was also a Llanowar Elves deck. So like you're noticing a pattern here, right? Like, oh yeah, I remember there was a green deck floating around standard for a while. I think it had Llanowar Elves in it.
Yeah, and if you look, I mean, in Pioneer, like since they banned Karn the Great Creator, we just, you know, there's no more main green heavy decks in that format either. In Modern, I don't think there is, right? There's there's Amy Titan in Modern.
Again, that's that's what Chris is talking about. That's just combo. That's just a combo deck. It's like it's a combo deck that happens to use green cards. Like I don't know, when we say green deck, what do we mean? Like mid-range creatures combat based deck is what you're kind of like.
Sure.
referring to.
I'm just pointing out that after looking through 3 formats, metagames, Ami Titan is the closest to a green deck that I've been able to find
Sure.
for you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's just, point being, like the reason we're discussing this again is like, it's like, oh yeah, I remember when there was like a fair green deck in Standard that one time, and it's like, oh yeah, that's because they printed Llanowar Elves into the format.
Dude, Chris went back to Ixalan. It just reminds me of the days where you could resolve Jade Light Ranger and be like just very happy about that.
Oh yeah, dude, yeah. I mean, that deck before like Ravnica came out and kind of ruined Standard, or War of the Spark really ruined Standard in my opinion. But yeah, it was Llanowar Elves and Carnage Tyrant.
Yeah.
And the Explore package. So you were running 4 Merfolk Branchwalkers, 4 Jade Light Rangers, and 4 of that
Wild
weird
Growth Walkers.
Yeah, and the weird elemental thing that grew and gained life when you explored. Yeah, Jade Light Ranger, dude. Going like turn 2, the life gain grow elemental into turn 2 Jade Light Ranger just felt so fucking sick. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that was back in an era of Magic when you could put like Midnight Reaper in your standard deck and feel good about it. So
yeah, Carnage Tyrant was the top threat in the format. Yeah, I think the last time that green was good and constructed that I can think of in at least Standard was it the Blizzard Brawl deck? The in like Old Grow Troll, Blizzard Brawl, Green Beatdown, Stompy deck.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Occasionally there's like a green, like a mono green quote unquote aggro deck, and it's almost always when they print like a green 3-drop that's actually pretty good.
Yeah, or like they accidentally print a Broken Fight spell.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason we're talking about this in terms of constructed, because we usually explicitly talk about cube, is that this is not just a cube problem of green having some balance issues. This is a modern Magic problem, I think. And like, it's a little bit better in cube. We actually have a problem of green being a little too good, but it's because all these really powerful threats, there isn't the consistency of the other archetypes that push green out of the metagame, right? You can't like always draft a blue-black tempo deck to crush your green opponents, for example. You know, you're kind of stuck with the cards that you get offered, and green has these power outliers and these mana dorks, and you get to dip into all the ones that they've printed, as opposed to like most constructed metagames where like there's 0 to 1 mana dork at any given point.
It's funny when was it Aganosaur Rex, the 5-mana 8/8 trample with cycle in and does stuff when you cycle it. When that card was revealed, I think it was Saffron Olive on Twitter was like, "This is the most pushed card that won't see standard play that I've ever seen in my life." it's like, yeah, these cards just never see standard play. They end up being quite good for cube. I think Aganosaur Rex is a top tier green threat for our cube, but I did want to circle back around to something real quick. So with minimizing 1-mana dorks, that kind of puts a lot of onus on the 2-mana dorks to like kind of pull their weight. And we've mentioned, we're on a lot of 2-mana dorks that ostensibly die to Doomblade, things like Twitch and Doll, and was it Tender Shoot something, the Bloomborough one with Offspring, yep, and things like that. There is a way, if we really wanted to like compensate for cutting a lot of 1-mana dorks by making the 2-mana dorks, more resilient. We do have access to be able to do that. There's, Paradise Druid and Sylvan Caryatid as like quote unquote hexproof dorks. We cut Caryatid a while back because exactly what we're talking about. It just made the mana production a little bit too free and kind of cut off your opponent's ability to interact with that plan. But there's also things like we could play Utopia Sprawl, you could play Wolf Willowhaven, you could play Fanatic of Ronus if you really just want a busted mana dork that survives on turn 2. That's the 1/4 that taps for 4 mana for some reason when you have a 4-power creature on board, which is not that hard to do in green. We also just got Farseek for the first time on the client, so still interested to see how Farseek's going to play out for us, but that does fall into the uninteractable ramp category. So like, if you came to the conclusion that 1-mana dorks are busted, but you don't want to just completely kneecap like green's ability to make mana early on, you can make a kind of robust 2-mana dork package to the point where like the 2-mana dorks are surviving quite often, which is not exactly what we want to do right now. Like, the whole point is to kind of make green settle in a place where it's more interactive. But my whole thought about this is that, like, turn 2 Bloated Contaminators are busted, but turn 3 Bloated Contaminators are still rock solid cards. So, like, if green just has to play its cards on curve, they're still very strong cards. But this gives the other colors a little bit more breathing room to not have to, like, fingers crossed that they don't have to play against, turn 1 Llanowar Elves every single time and have an answer for it, or just get, snowballed out of control.
I think an interesting balance question, if you decide you're going to curtail your one mana dorks, like slow down your acceleration in your green section, is like obviously that is generally speaking going to improve aggro's prospects into green, right? Because you're not just getting like ham sandwiched. You're getting like one more turn before the stuff you can't attack through starts coming down. So that's going to be beneficial for that. I would say that, and green, obviously, like generalizing whenever we're talking about cube, the way that most green sections are designed in most cubes, generally speaking, green has a good aggro matchup for that very reason, right? Eventually, if you don't kill your green opponent, they just start resolving things that you can't attack into or deal with.
And eventually happens a lot sooner than you would like.
Yes, eventually it can like really happen on turn 2 these days. It can happen very, very quickly. So I think slowing down your green acceleration is going to improve your aggressive matchup into your green decks, which may be something that is desirable for you based on like how your meta is going. That's something that's primarily like that's the reason that we're looking at this, right? If we're being honest with ourselves, like that's really what's kind of driving this, I think, is like control decks already have a good green matchup, right? The counterpoint, the balance concern, I think we're going to have to keep in mind, and if you decide to curtail the speed of your green ramp, you're going to have to keep in mind as well, is slowing down green's acceleration curve is naturally going to weaken its matchup into control because it's going to be harder to get underneath the control deck by putting out something lethal and scary before the control deck gets their game plan together. And that's already a bad matchup for green. So I think that's something that we're going to want to keep an eye on, is if it does slowing green down make it suck even harder against blue, right? And if it does, what are the options that we would have to consider in order to address that problem? Is it, taking a look at the way that blue is interacting with green, or is it maybe looking toward more cards that can't be countered, even though I find that text to be sort of lame? And anytime you make a tweak in an effort to address a design problem, you're invariably going to kind of create another one. So that's something that I think we need to be mindful of.
Yeah, because I could totally see the narrative here being like the green players, they're playing 3 drops on 3, 4 drops on 4, and they're getting them counterspelled, and then the conversation goes back to, the blue counterspells are too good, or whatever.
And that's 100% going to happen. Yeah.
Which it is important to note too that like we've cut down on the density and overall efficiency of some of the counterspells. Like we're not playing, this isn't just like green's the only one getting hit with a nerf bat on occasion.
No, not at all. That wasn't the point that I was trying to make. Just like, the really, if we're being honest with ourselves, tinkering with slowing down green's acceleration, I think, is largely a nod to the fact that green just stuffs smaller creature decks insanely fast, right? It's not a change that we're making to address any other matchup. Like that's the matchup in question, really.
Couple questions. What do you guys think of like alternative 1 mana dorks? So things like Sentinel Stalwart, like the 1 mana creatures that say tap a artifact or creature in addition to them, add 1 mana. Basically, Land of War Elves that requires you to tap something else, and then there's also like Molt Tender, which is the Ether Drift card that's 1 mana, 1/1. Tap it to mill a card or tap it to exile a card from your graveyard to make mana. I guess Deathrite Shaman's also like somewhat in this conversation. And then on top of the alternative 1 mana dorks, what do you guys think of like the Rampant Growth variants? Because like I said, we have Farseek, but there's also Rampant Growth and Glimpse the Core on the client. So I mean, I devil's advocate here. I already know what you guys think of the cards, but for the listener, what do you think of these alternatives to just traditional mana dorks?
Yeah, I really like Sentinel Stalwarts and those sort of effects. I'm a fan of the design, but I don't think this is the cube for them. Like, the Stalwart's really cool if you're playing a bunch of artifacts that you can reliably get out early into the game, like food tokens and things like that, to be able to tap. But most of these effects, the Jaspara Sentinel style effects, they kind of just snowball mid-game advantages if you're able to get on board and like tap your dudes down. But I don't know how often you want to be doing that in the first place. The Rampant Growth effects, I think, are mostly terrible, though I think Farseek is specifically different because it's one very good fixing off of shocks and surveil lands, and the addition value, we talked about this in the set review, of being able to now get a surveil land and potentially have your Farseek be like kind of draw a card at some point, is a really, really meaningful upside compared to some of the other ones.
I think that they are weak enough that in a cube at sort of like a power level similar to ours or stronger, I think I would rather just play. I think I'd rather just put more good 2-drop acceleration in my decks than trying to play your like Sentinels or your kind of like Arboreal Grazers or cards like that. I wouldn't put them in my deck. I don't know if that's right. I think that when you like these effects are so difficult to balance, right? Because it's either Llanowar Elves or it's Llanowar Elves with hoops, and it's like it's almost like there is no hoop you could select that doesn't just make Llanowar Elves with hoops like an abysmal card. Like instead of putting like bad 1-drop accelerant or like Gilded Goose, I know I'm a known hater. I would rather, instead of putting Gilded Goose in my deck, I'd rather just put like a second copy of Paradise Druid in there or something. I think that depending on your cube's power level, or if you're trying to go for something deliberately lower power level, like that, they could be fine cards for your cube. But for sort of just a generic like fair stuff power cube like ours, I just think that they're pretty bad cards, and I think even if they weren't actively bad cards, people would view them as actively bad cards and not take them.
I'm going to throw a couple card names at you guys real quick, and you let me know like if you think they would be appropriate for our cube if we got them on the client like today.
Okay.
First one that comes to mind, Jiraga Tree Speaker. That's for people who don't know, old goodie there. That's a green mana for a 1/1 with a level up. You could pay 1 and a green to essentially let it start tapping for green. So you have to spend turn 2 to turn it into a dork that taps for green.
Okay, it's what do they call that? They call it Green Soul Ring or something?
Something like that, yeah.
That one's a little more complicated because you can't use it to cast a 3-drop on turn 2, which is a big problem. But on the flip side, it virtually guarantees you can play like a 5-drop on turn 3, which is the other side of the coin. I mean, that one's one that I don't know, like, you spend 2 mana leveling it up, and then your opponent Doomblades it in response, and that's pretty bad for you. That one would be one of the more interesting ones to get, because I don't think it's like, obviously the explosiveness, the upside is there, but the amount of investment you have to do to get to it might make it something we would be interested in testing. Though again, I'm not 100% sure, because like you play it on the play, your opponent doesn't have a 1 mana removal spell for it. You go turn 2, level it up, cast like, Farseek, cast Paradise Druid or whatever. And now you're just in such a dominating position, even if they do kill it, right? Because you're already up mana, and like your opponent had to Doomblade your 1-drop that kind of free cycled on turn 2. So I would say it's probably too good, because that one's a historically powerful card, but the risk is certainly there, especially on the draw.
Yeah, the idea behind that card being that if you can level it up on 2 and then immediately tap it for green, it kind of like pays for its own level up, and then it's a supercharged mana dork. How about Boreal Druid? This is green mana for a 1/1, technically a snow creature. It taps for colorless mana, so it's like a Llanowar Elves that only taps for colorless. Does that really change the paradigm on a Llanowar Elves that much?
No,
a little bit. It doesn't really solve like the fundamental problem. I think, obviously, like making green mana is better. And I want to say something here as well. Like, I'm not sold that like 1 mana dorks will be cut down to this level in our cube forever. Like, things keep changing. Things look today in ways that I didn't think that they would look multiple years ago. Maybe the issues that this type of acceleration presents for certain colors stop being as much of an issue because like white gets better or something. I don't know. But yeah, I think the tap for a colorless is almost as good as Llanowar Elves. I mean, like Avacyn's Pilgrim, I don't like, but like, we took that out obviously.
I'm going to assume Wild Growth is like very much in the same conversation. That's actually, Wild Growth might be busted. It's a green mana for an aura that enchants any land, and then the land taps for an additional green. So Utopia Sprawl, that doesn't fix, but it can go on any land, doesn't have to go on a forest. I'm assuming that's just in that interactable range of like, here, I'm going to get my mana no matter what, and there's very little you can do about it.
Yeah.
And then Designer Hat, okay? Putting this one on. What do you guys think of a Llanowar Elves that had to exert to make its mana?
Ooh.
Huh. Okay, that's
1 mana, 1/1. Give it no other abilities except exert, tap for green. Like, that's basically a strictly worse Llanowar Elves, so I don't know. Like, we would never see that card, right? Especially with Foundations, like, kind of having Llanowar Elves in Standard forever. There's no reason to print that card. But would that fit our design goals? Because you guarantee the ramp off of it if it lives, but you only get it every other turn.
Yeah, did you say it taps for green or any color?
I mean, let's say green, but if you wanted to make it like a standard card that's actually viable, maybe it taps to make a treasure. Maybe it taps for any color so that it actually would have a shot at being played in standard over Land of War Elves.
I think Exert Green would be pretty terrible, or pretty middling at best. It might be something that we'd be looking for in the short run, but I think long run it would be pretty bad. Exert makes
like Gilded Goose sucks, right?
No, Gilded Goose is fine.
Yeah, well, you have to dump more mana into Gilded Goose even to use it for mana.
Gilded Goose certainly does not suck. But in any case,
anyway.
Solid 7 out of 10.
If a 1-drop that has to exert to make green mana is bad, then Gilded Goose is also bad. Because Gilded Goose makes mana one time.
Yeah, it makes any color though. Again, so if it exerts to make any color, like that's probably pretty good, right? Because you can still exert to cast your 3-drop, and then you go from there. You just cast a 4, and then you're kind of open on mana. Like I think the 1-shot mana effect is totally fine. Like I said, I think Gilded Goose is fine because I think the acceleration, even if it only happens one time, is often so powerful that it gives you like a pretty heavy advantage. That would be an interesting pickup, just because it would be something that is really, like, obviously you can't use it all the time, so like you have to really plan out, like, is your 3-drop going to be worth it? Do you want to save it for your 4 on turn 3 or whatever? It would be interesting. I think tapping for green would be bad. I think tapping to make a treasure would be kind of wild.
That could be potentially too good, right? Because then it's actually compiling mana after it exerts like the second time.
Yeah. Not only that, it has like teething wormlet style synergies if you're doing that. Like
yeah.
So
that's the card I would want to see because I just like fiddly artifacts and stuff.
Yeah,
but I feel like that actually would be pushing it a little bit too much.
Agreed.
Okay, here's a designer hack question for you guys. What would you think about like a Birds of Paradise style card, but it came in tapped with a stun counter on it? So like you play it, it doesn't untap the first turn, right? So your opponent has like one more turn to find an answer, try to get underneath of it, and then like it's the same ramp, it's just delayed a turn. So it slows down the explosiveness of the start, but still provides like the ramp into the bigger place.
Yeah, I personally don't hate that because one of the biggest issues with the 1-mana Dorks is the 3-drops coming down on turn 2. Like every step you go up above that is like more manageable. Obviously the threats are, progressively bigger, but a 4-drop on 3 or a 5-drop on 4 is like slightly more manageable for a lot of decks than the 3-drop on 2. So I kind of like that. I don't even necessarily care that it's like a absolutely terrible top deck because the Mana Dorks are already terrible top decks. So like that doesn't change that much about it. But I think we're getting at the same idea here as 1-mana Dorks that basically like mimic the 1-mana traditionally powerful 1-mana Dorks, but they have some sort of caveat to the point where you just don't get to free roll like your game plan if your opponent just doesn't deal with the Dorks. So
right.
I like that idea as well. I think that's a pretty cool way to kind of balance it a little bit. Maybe you'd have to give it some stats or something so that's not just like strictly worse than like Birds of Paradise or something.
This would probably be a little too complicated, but I was just thinking what you said about being a terrible top deck. Like if you left it a 1/1, like maybe instead of coming in like tapped with a stun counter on it, it would come in with like some kind of counter that doesn't get removed until like your next end step. And while it has that counter, it can't produce mana, but that's not very clean. Yeah, I don't know.
I know we're going down to designer territory, but there could be some overlap there with a Mana Dork that comes in with a counter and like you use its counter to make mana. Like maybe it's a 1-shot effect, but then the counter like puts stats on it or something. So that it becomes an attacker instead of a Mana Dork. I mean, you usually only need that 1 shot of mana. Obviously, you want your Mana Dorks to like continue producing mana, but there were times where you go Gilded Goose and 3-drop and like you're off to the races. Whereas the problem really comes with the Land of War Elves, where it's like my 3-drops out on 3. Now I'm using it for my 4-drop, or my 3-drops out on 2, my 4-drops out on 3, my 5-drops out on 4. Like it just compounds turn after turn after turn. But yeah. 1-shot mana production every other turn, something like that. We're going down the same line here of like trying to create balanced Land of War Elves or balanced Birds of Paradise. So, same concept, but I think that would be a cool concept. I'm not sure Again, these are all just worse than Birds of Paradise, but that's kind of the point. All right, what else, anything else you guys got for green? I mean, I guess there's a conversation about, like, we talked about Vorinclex, we talked about, these Elder Gargaroth style cards that are insane late game threats. We could go up the curve a little bit to the 6 drops and 7 drops, talk about things like Vaultborn Tyrant or whatever. We play Titan of Industry as a 7 drop.
Was it Gruff Triplets?
Gruff Triplets should probably get mentioned at some point this episode, but like, are those insane top end threats more manageable? I guess they're the same, like, because the 2-mana dorks are just going to accelerate those out to the same point that the 1-mana dorks would, right? Maybe you don't get the 2 on like turn 5 or whatever, but they're still just problems, right? The problem cards at the top end of the curve are still problems regardless of, whether your mana acceleration is concentrated at 1 mana or 2 mana. Mm-hmm.
I don't think slowing down the ramp curve is going to make like the 6 and 7 drops like meaningfully worse, right? Which is actually good in my opinion. Like, I wouldn't want this change to equally impact like all points in the curve for green. By the time you find your land for Titan, like whether or not you played your acceleration on like turn 1 or turn 2, I don't really think is what's influencing how quickly it comes down a good percentage of the time. The real issue, as we've discussed at length at this point, is the turn 2 3 drop and then also the turn 3 5 or 6 drop pattern. Yeah, it's like a turn 3. If you're playing an aggressive deck and your opponent plays like a turn 3 Tovolar's Huntmaster, which is like bad green Grave Titan, which is still awesome, like I just don't think you can win that game. And when I've played against green decks and I'm on the draw and my opponent goes like Llanowar Elves, and then turn 2 goes like Llanowar Elves plus 2-drop Dork, I'm like, fuck. If there's anything in their hand other than lands, I just lose. Whereas aggressive, it's not like that with aggressive decks, right? Like aggressive decks, if your opponent goes like 1-drop, 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 you're like, ah, shit, that's a lot of aggression really, really fast. But it's not the same oh fuck feeling as seeing like a couple Dorks develop instantaneously. Like it's a much sicker feeling in the pit of your stomach.
Yeah, and this is where it's important to recognize too. I think part of cube design ends up being, or a large percentage of cube design is vibes, right? And like, I do think the green dorks are substantially more powerful than the other dork or the other 1-mana cards of other colors. But part of it is that like you said, that sickening feeling in your gut of like, this is actually unbeatable, as opposed to just like okay, I just need to find some removal and some blockers and we have a chance.
Yeah, you get put on the back foot in like a whole different way. The other thing I think that kind of changed over time is like green just getting progressively better card advantage, right? Because it used to be like vomit out your hand of dorks and then like make your one big play with it and you hope that that's good enough, right? And if it's not good enough, then all of your dorks are crap, right? And it was kind of like you just kind of shot your wad, to like ramp out whatever's in your hand. But cheap acceleration combined with the fact that like basically everything in Magic produces card advantage now, that's really the problem, because you're going to continue to get juice out of those dorks for a protracted... Like, if you're drawing cards while resolving things, you're just going to continue to get juice out of those dorks, right? Because I think once upon a time, pre-green card advantage, like, the mana dorks almost kind of were like that Exert example that you gave, where it was like the fact that they produced mana ahead of schedule only mattered like once or twice. But in an era where you can just keep seeing more and more and more and more cards, like if you manage to play a turn 1 dork and it taps for mana that you needed to tap for like 3 times, then that's an insane card, right? If it only taps for the mana that you invested 1 time, that's still okay. But if you're consistently seeing a flow of cards and resources into your hands that allow you to just get juice out of those dorks turn after turn after turn, they're some of the most powerful cards in Magic.
Well, because one of the weaknesses of traditional ramp decks, like go back 10 years, is, playing all those dorks out meant that, you really needed your finisher to land, or you really needed 1 or 2 specific cards to, like, wrap up the game, because you were at a disadvantage. You played a bunch of 1/1s, and into the late game they didn't scale very well, but now, like, you get to mitigate that by just drawing a bunch of cards. So, your 1/1 dork isn't as much of a liability in the late game, because you just have so much more card flow going on with things like, I guess Tireless Tracker's starting to show its age a little bit, but on the higher end, you have things like the Great Henge and stuff like that, just, turbo accelerating your card advantage and things like that.
The Henge, we miss you. I miss you anyway.
Will not be
Mana Sinks too. Things as simple as like Huatli, Huatli has a mana sink mode, something you can use mana on that produces an advantage on board and stuff like that. So there's a lot more of that as well. Radagast comes to mind. 4 mana Radagast is like, I'm going to mitigate the cost of my, dorky mana dorks by just drawing a bunch of cards anyway and having a full hand into the late game. So it's not as much of a liability to just, hope and pray that your mana dorks live, because green just gets so much card advantage these days.
My favorite makes your dorks into something useful over the course of the entire game is Defiler of Vigor. Because you spit it out on turn 3 with dorks, and then as you cast spells, it makes your dorks into giant creatures, and it also makes drawing more dorks not as bad because you can cast them for free and buff your entire board.
Yeah. Land Elves is pretty good when it puts 5+1/+1 counters on board.
Yeah.
One mana, 6
for zero.
Or
0 mana. If you've got something else in your hand you want to play, right? Because you just Phyrexian life it.
Green also gets a lot of those play from the top of your library cards these days with things like Vivian and Ranger's Class and stuff like that. So, I don't know. It feels like you're never... Doomscar Warrior draws a bunch of cards. It feels like you're never really out of gas in green unless you just, don't draft cards that draw cards, I guess.
Which is
unless you're,
difficult.
stuck in... Yeah, if you're stuck in 2012 and, the only thing you know how to do is try to ramp into Woodfall Primus or Craterhoof Behemoth or something like that, and you just never got out of that mindset, But Teld's right. I mean, the cards are seeded in our cube such that if you draft green cards, you're probably going to have some sort of card advantage floating around. That's just, the best cards do that. So, hard to not fall into that paradigm, but yeah. Any other thoughts here on green, ramp, implications of ramp, changes we've made? Feels like we've kind of wrapped up what we've done for our cube and why it's important for our cube, but any other, closing thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think we've gone over it pretty thoroughly from my perspective. I'm just going to be interested to see how these changes play out. I mean, the reality is, how many 1-drop dorks did we cut? 3?
Avacyn's Pilgrim, Elvish Mystic, Delighted Halfling?
Yeah, so we cut 3 out of 5. So, it is going to have an impact, but, I mean, if you average it out statistically over however many games you're going to play, I think that green is largely going to play in a very similar way to how it has. I don't think this is going to, revolutionize what green decks look like or whatever. It'll just make those explosive pop-off starts a little rarer.
Not sure I agree, but I get the sentiment. I think you're just the consistency of having multiple dorks is going to go down, obviously, and so the likelihood that your deck is mostly built around your 3-drop curve might go down a little bit. You might do more 2s. There's going to be some deck building differential that happens. It's going to definitely you're going to change the if you look, a lot of green decks that we're seeing trophy have 2 to 3 dorks in them in the 1 mana slot. But now you're not going to get 2 dorks very often anymore. You might get 1 if you're lucky, which is still going to be a powerful deck potentially. It just is not going to be quite as oppressive towards, like you said, specifically the white decks that can't really interact nor get under or go over the top. So hopefully that'll help a little bit with that.
Yeah, I will say this. As you were kind of talking through, I realized maybe I was I undersold it a little bit. If you are the one green player at the entire table and you draft mono green, your mono green deck is about to look a whole hell of a lot different and probably be a whole lot worse. I think we've probably made mono green a whole lot worse by making this change.
Yeah, it's fine though. Mono green is not a design goal necessarily.
Yeah, no, it doesn't even show up very often because there are enough really powerful cards in the cube that I think even if going mono is optional and our fixing package is extensive enough that even if going mono is possible, it's still usually probably just a better idea to play at least 2 colors, even if you could have been mono green.
That actually came up not too long ago, maybe a couple months ago, where somebody drafted our cube for the first time. They drafted mono green because green cards were flowing, and then they did pretty poorly in the draft, and they complained a little bit. They were a little salty. They were like, well, I don't understand why mono green doesn't have better tools. And it's well, we're not seeding mono. You just drafted all green cards. We're not seeding a mono green deck here.
There's no
equity.
What's his name? Elf weirdo that makes green mana for every creature you have, or Rathalos or whatever, or every forest makes double green or something.
Yeah, or green, Steel Leaf Champion threats, which those aren't even up to snuff compared to the 2 in a green cards that we get these days, like Bloated Contaminator and Sentinel of the Lost City and stuff like that. So, that's not even a way to seed mono green, I don't think. unless you're doing devotion specifically, but then that's a Nykthos deck. That's not really a green deck in my opinion.
Actually, Sentinel is a card that I'd like to briefly just kind of talk about for just a second. With the reduced number of those, is there a world where Sentinel gets to come back because it's not coming down on turn 2 anymore?
Maybe. I still think that card's really obnoxious.
That's my read as well, as it's probably still a little bit kind of crazy, but like
it's kind of like Elder Gargoyle. It's kind of like 3-mana Elder Gargoyle against aggressive decks. I mean, it sort of is, right? I mean, it kind of sort of is.
It is a take.
I mean, it's a 3/4. It's vigilant. It's huge. It continues to get huge. Can produce card advantage. I mean, it's not Gargaroth, right? But I'm saying like
I get your sentiment. I do get the sentiment.
Big vigilance creatures that constantly generate value are very, very hard for aggressive decks to deal with.
Yeah, I mean it's a rock solid card. Like hard to deny that it's a brick wall against anything that can't get through a 3/4, often 4/5 or whatever. So yeah, that one might still be in the we don't necessarily want to mess with this territory. Yeah, okay, I guess that's a good place to go ahead and wrap up on this green conversation here. Just kind of a short conversation about what's going on in the Jank Diver Gaming Cube with ramp. This is not necessarily advice that we're recommending other people do. This is just a metagame call for us that maybe, will be mimicked by other people. If you're seeing some sort of issue with green, if you're having super polarized green matchups where 1-mana dorks are just deciding games, like maybe it's time to like buck the trend a little bit. It's kind of like heresy to cut 1-mana dorks, right? Like it's just that's part of their identity. We've literally had people, in our chat say I would play any number of mana dorks I could. If we had 10 1-mana dorks on the client, you should be playing 10 1-mana green dorks. That's just what green does. And it's like, well, that's what green has traditionally done. And, being a cube designer means you can change that if you want to. So we're going to make this change, or we've already made this change. We're going to monitor it. We're not even saying necessarily that we thought this was the right change. It's just we're going to see how it plays. If over the course of the next 3 months, green just never trophies and just never seems to have a real matchup, then yeah, maybe it is the case that like the green 1-drops are just way too important to what green does. But I don't think that's the case. We obviously don't think that's the case if we all unanimously came to this decision, and we're going to see how it plays out, and maybe we'll report back on it at some point. But yeah, unless you guys have anything else to cover on the green vibes here, I think we can go ahead and close this bad boy out and remind everybody you can find us on Twitter at JankDiverGaming, youtube.com/JankDiverGaming, find Teld streaming on twitch.tv/TeldTalks, or on YouTube at Teld Talks. And I guess next couple episodes might be a little bit wonky from my perspective. I've got a big cross-country move coming up. We've talked about it a little bit off air. But if you're at this point in this episode and, the next episode after this is like delayed or something like that, just bear with me. I'm moving across the country, so there's going to be some wonkiness with editing and recording and stuff like that. Just for reference, I literally finished editing the Peasant Final Fantasy review last night. So I'm a little bit behind on editing and stuff like that, but we'll get you some stuff going on. I actually think Edge of Eternities comes out like way sooner than we think it does. I think spoilers for that set start next week or something like that. So we've got the last real Magic the Gathering set of the year coming up here soon as well. So, and I still want to do that episode about the contributions of different sets to our cube, and which sets are contributing the most and which sets have dropped off a cliff because of power creep and stuff like that. So that's all in the works at some point. But as always, thanks to the listener for listening to the Jank Tank podcast. We'll catch you all next time. You guys want to chat about Expedition 33? I saw Teld finished it last night. Yeah, I've been playing it myself lately.
We can chat a little bit about it, sure. Obvious potential spoiler warnings, even though I'm sure we'll try to avoid that.
Well, don't do that. Don't spoil anything, because I'm not that far into the game, so okay. I don't want to be spoiled. Sure. Just for reference, I have entered. Where am I? I went through a place where the set piece was a giant Nevron that was like eating a mountain. And okay. I unlocked the guy who can like break rocks on the world map for you to like travel around and stuff. So I'm pretty sure I'm still fairly early into the game, but I know you finished it. So did you want to give your like recap of it, your review of it?
Yeah, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed both the story and the gameplay. Like it was there. I had some issues near the end of the game with some some of the way that they sort of direct you. But other than that little quabble, like it's one of the better games that I've played. I'm tentatively putting it like number 5 all time for me. Like I really enjoyed the plot, and I thought the gameplay was super engaging for a JRPG, which is something I haven't experienced since like Final Fantasy X. So yeah, just overall really compelling game. I really liked the main couple of cast of characters. And I really enjoyed the story that they chose to tell. Excuse me. So yeah, highly recommended. If you haven't played it, it's on Game Pass. So if you want to drop $10 or whatever, you can probably beat it within the month. And yeah, it was really innovative. Really just overall great game.
Yeah, so Teld didn't explain anything about the game itself, but it's a...
Sorry, I was trying to... I'll let you do that since you're earlier in the game. I'm trying to avoid any spoilers here because I want you to experience that.
Yeah, I don't have much to say about the plot itself because I'm too early anyway, but as far as like gameplay goes, I believe it's a French RPG. Don't hear that. FRPG? Is that a thing?
Technically it's an FRPG, yeah.
FRPG?
Yeah, and it's funny because like 5 minutes into the game, they're like bonjour, here's a baguette, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. It's a French game, but it's a turn-based role-playing game, but it also has like I hesitate to say Soulsborne, but it has a parry block system, block dodge system embedded into the actual turn-based stuff. What they did is, I think they did parrying right. I've complained a lot of times, even on the podcast and like outros, I've complained about parry-based gaming, where like everybody just wants to be the next Bloodborne or Dark Souls, and they're like, we're going to make super hard games and we're going to make people parry 15 times. What I have found works for me with Claire Obscura Expedition 33 is the parries are tight, but the damage output is forgiving. So my problem with parry-based games is that they also just have insane damage output. So like not only do you have to get good at parrying, but you just die in like 2 or 3 hits to like every enemy, every boss ever. So it becomes this slog of like having to retry over and over and over again, and then finally getting something right just to have to do it again for the next boss down the line and learn different windows. But I found that the damage output is scaled back just enough that like you can learn parries within one fight and then get better at them. So I appreciated that they didn't just ramp up the difficulty into like actual Soulsborne territory, and it actually makes it like really fun to learn the parrying system and stuff like that. So I think the combat system is great, and yes, there's a really compelling story. I don't know where it's actually going at the point in the story that I'm at, but the characters are interesting enough. The main character Gustav is actually like charming little dude. Hopefully, I don't know what happens to him by the end. Maybe he's the bad guy or whatever. Who knows? But yeah, there's a lot of compelling stuff. It's got that kind of like, I don't necessarily like this, but it's got this kind of like vibe throughout, like, ooh, what's gonna happen? Like, ooh, what does this mean? Like this sort of mystery thing where I feel like by the end of the game it might not actually like answer the questions you want answered, but hopefully it does. Hopefully it does.
I was left with not a lot of questions.
Okay, that's good. Okay, I like a decisive ending. I don't like that BS like Lost on ABC nonsense.
No, there's a pretty decisive ending to the game. Yeah, I will tell. Okay. I will tell you that much. Yeah. I think what a fantastic game.
It's a good game. Yeah. I didn't actually end up finding the characters very compelling at all. The story's okay. The main thing that grabbed me about it was that it is extremely like aesthetically distinct. The combat system is really cool, and I said this to Teld a while back. Like, what I get out of the combat system and like the way encounters are set up is kind of what I think I would want to get out of replaying an older Final Fantasy turn-based game. Mm-hmm. The fact that they introduced like the dynamic dodge parry system into turn-based select your attack or defensive move, and you've got time to think about it style combat. I think it's really innovative and did a great job of sort of providing me with like that turn-based kind of combat that I really like thinking through the next steps, what I want to do in order, yada yada yada, while also having like a very dynamic component to the combat. I will say that I found the difficulty scaling and curving to be pretty wonky in certain areas. Like things would be pretty consistent for a while and even get to the point where it was like pretty easy, and then like the next step in the process, you're just like, why am I getting two-shotted all of a sudden?
I only felt that way when I went into like some side areas. I think if you just go along the scripted main area outside of a few fights, it was pretty relatively stable damage scaling.
No, 100%. Through like the main story, most definitely. It's there is without spoiling anything, there's a component of the main story that you finish that kind of feels like it might be the end of the game, but it's not. At which point
have you finished the game too, Chris?
No, I know, like I could go and finish it now. I'm going around and doing some side stuff, and I actually haven't played in a few days because my controller's being wonky and it keeps dying in the middle of attack sequences. Yeah, which is frustrating, as you can imagine. It would be like your controller periodically turning off while you're playing Dark Souls.
I will say, if you're a completionist, which I am not, I will preface this that I am not a completionist. There is definitely some content that is brutally difficult if you're willing to go engage with it. I'm not. Like, I played the main story, I did everything that was story related, and outside of one small area of problem, I found it was pretty stable, and that generally speaking, on the normal average difficulty, I was able to pretty quickly, like, find some stuff that worked for me and carried me through the back half of the game when the difficulty gets a little harder. I think you have to like you have to like start combining skills in ways that let you like be more than the sum of their parts in a way. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really fun to do so, and also there's enough respecking available that if you mess up, you just respec and it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Overall, I thought it was a great game, or think it's a great game. The combat's pretty revolutionary. Like I said, I didn't actually find the characters very compelling, and I did kind of find the rate at which you kind of become aware of what's going on story-wise to be a little uneven. Like, from my perspective, like, I think as an RPG, I think it's fairly flawed, but it also is their first outing. And if this is their first product, then they're going to make some amazing games if people keep giving them money, which I would highly encourage people to keep giving them money.
Yeah. I guess when I say I found the characters compelling, I find a few of them very compelling. I will agree, though, that there are some characters in the game, like some of your party members, I don't really have strong opinions about, but I found them, outside of one who I just only remember one thing about them throughout the entire game, I found most of them at least generally likable. But the main couple of characters, in terms of plot relevance, I found pretty compelling. So I don't know. I think it's like I said, I think the story it told was really, really good. I think it's a little uneven at times, but I think that comes with playing JRPGs. That's just that genre of game. Sometimes they'll have really good stories, but there can be some uneven pacing in the mid game when it becomes more about the combat system as opposed to directly moving the story ahead. But like you said, this was their first outing, and I found the game resonated with me enough that like it made it into my top tier of games, just off of sheer like emotional weight. I think like it was really I found the overall narrative that it told super compelling.
Yeah, I'm hoping it keeps at the same pace. Again, I agree with a lot of what's said here. I have found it to be extremely easy so far. Granted, I'm like 3-4 boss battles in or something like that, and I assume it's fairly large looking at the world map, so it looks like there's quite a bit more game, and it's exactly the type of combat system where I expect it to get harder as it goes on, more challenging and things like
dude,
that.
Just for reference, as far as difficulty scaling, there's some side content that I did recently where I counted, literally, the boss's attack sequence, I had to dodge 22 times. And a single blow landing would like chunk like 50% of my team's health, and it was an AoE attack.
To be fair, I know exactly what enemy you're talking about, or I think I do. And that specific enemy, one, is optional, and two, is a gimmick fight. It is intentionally. It has a very yeah.
I know what you guys are talking about. It's been posted on Twitter like nonstop.
Oh, really? Okay, I hadn't seen any of that. I was just like, I did that fight, and I was like, okay, dude, my finger is starting to bother me. Can we move this along?
Yeah. I found the window, once I figured out what I was doing, I found the window pretty forgiving, but it was a silly fight.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where it goes back to, like, if you lose in a battle, they just pop you right outside of where you just died.
Yeah.
So it's like there's no run back or anything, so I don't feel super bad about that sort of stuff. Yeah. So again, just I've run into a couple mimes that have kicked my ass. I don't know why there are mimes everywhere, but I guess French people like mimes, I guess, is the joke or something like that. So yeah, very cool game. I also highly recommend it, though. I'll have more of a full review of it when I actually finish the game in 3 months or whatever. I get like an hour session in every other day or something like that. So slow work for me, but it was highly recommended by people in the Discord. I tried it out, and I think it's a great little RPG, flaws and all.
Have you been called a dork your whole life just because you tap for green mana? Do people use you for early game ramp and then toss you away to a sack engine in the late game? Have you or a loved one you know been caught up in a freed from the real twiddle combo lately? Hi, I'm Lana War Elves, and I'm here to tell you, you're not alone. For decades, cheap mana creatures like us have been exploited for our mana-producing abilities and callously tossed aside. Wizards has failed to give us reasonable utility beyond our mana abilities. Some of us don't even tap for other colors besides green, and our base 1/1 stats are untenable in the current state of the game. Together, we must unite against our ramp-hungry oppressors and say, enough is enough. We dorks need to unite and put an end to this treachery. To all the bops and hierarchs and elvish mystics of the world, now is our chance to put our wings and feet down. No longer will we chump block on turn 6 or feed a natural order in Legacy. No longer will we die to Fatal Push before we've tapped for mana. No longer will we lose jobs to the overprinting of treasure tokens and mana rocks. And no longer will we be victim of 1-damage mini-sweepers designed specifically to counterbalance 1-mana accelerants in constructed formats. Today, we stand up for ourselves. We take the path of those who came before us. We look to our ancestors for inspiration, like Devoted Druid, and Jiraga Tree Speaker, and Deathrite Shaman, and we aspire to be as powerful as Modern Horizons cards, like Malevolent Rumble and Fanatic of Ronus. The age of the new mana dork is coming, and together we'll bring ramp decks into a new, glorious future. Thank you all for listening. This has been Lana War Elves, tapping out.